The box was smaller than anyone expected. After 37 years of dead ends, missing reports, and faded Polaroids, the answer, or at least a whisper of it, was sitting in a dusty cardboard box no bigger than a shoebox. The label on top had faded to near invisibility, but the evidence tag still clung to the side like a scar. Case number 79-1047, Unsolved. Agent Daniel Reese stood in the dim light of the evidence room, his gloved hands hovering over the lid. He wasn't supposed to be there. Not technically. The case was cold, archived decades ago, the kind of file that newer agents didn't even know existed. But for Reese, it wasn't just another cold case. It was the case.
The one his father never stopped talking about.
The Maple Hollow homicide. They had called it back in 1979. A small-town nightmare that had stretched all the way to Washington. A young woman found in the woods, no ID, no leads. The killer left nothing behind except a trail of confusion and a single unidentified hair tangled in her bracelet. Back then, DNA analysis was still science fiction. The local sheriff's office shipped the evidence off to the state lab, but when nothing came of it, it ended up here, in the FBI's cold case archives. And now, all these years later, Reese couldn't help himself.
He opened the lid.
Inside were 2 manila folders, a sealed glass vial, and a Polaroid of the victim. He swallowed hard. Even through the grainy image, her face looked almost peaceful. The coroner's report said she died instantly from a blunt force blow to the head, likely a hammer. There were no defensive wounds. No struggle. Reese reached for the evidence log and flipped through the yellowed pages. His father's handwriting was there, Reese, J.T., the lead investigator on the case back then. A note scrawled at the bottom caught his eye. We're missing something. Check the bracelet again. The bracelet had been photographed, logged, and sealed in the vial with that single strand of hair. Back then it had meant nothing. But to Reese, standing here in 2016, it meant everything. DNA tech had come a long way. Mitochondrial sequencing could now extract genetic markers from even degraded samples. He lifted the vial carefully. The hair was still visible, coiled like a question mark inside the glass. One strand, delicate, colorless, but stubbornly preserved. He took a deep breath. "Let's see what secrets you've been keeping," he muttered. By morning, the hair was on its way to Quantico's forensic division for advanced testing. Reese stayed awake the whole night, reading every word of his father's reports. The deeper he went, the more he realized how personal it had been. His father had chased the case until it nearly broke him. Witnesses recanted, evidence disappeared, and 2 suspects, brothers from a nearby logging camp, vanished within months of the murder.
Then, abruptly, the case froze. Now, decades later, Reese had reopened it without authorization.
3 days later, a message flashed across his screen. From Forensic Division. Subject, DNA results, case 79-1047. His hand shook as he opened it. Sample extracted successfully. Partial mitochondrial match to an active case profile. He froze. An active case? That wasn't possible.
He scrolled down.
Match ID. Number 13908, Bell County, Ohio. Case, the Hollow Creek Murders. Bell County. A rural patch of farmland 3 hours east, and the site of a series of unsolved disappearances between 2012 and 2015. Reese leaned back, pulse pounding. Whoever the hair belonged to wasn't just connected to a decades-old murder, they were connected to a modern one. He stood abruptly, slamming the laptop shut. He needed to go to Bell County. But as he gathered the file and shoved it into his bag, he noticed something strange, a second Polaroid tucked behind the first. It was of the same woman, but this one had writing on the back. In faded pen, she knew too much. Reese's heart sank. His father had never mentioned this photo in his notes, which meant someone else had slipped it into the file later. He turned the photo over again, studying the handwriting. It was shaky but deliberate, the kind of script that came from an older hand. He'd seen it before, his father's old letters.
He whispered, "Dad, what did you find?"
He didn't notice the figure watching from the far end of the archive hallway, half hidden behind a shelf. A silhouette that lingered just long enough to see the file in his hands, then slipped quietly away into the dark. That night, as Reese drove through the rain toward Bell County, he called up the Hollow Creek case file. 3 victims, all women, all vanished from rural areas within a 50-mile radius. Each one had been last seen wearing jewelry, bracelets, necklaces, or pendants, all handcrafted from thin copper wire.
The coincidence was too sharp to ignore. As lightning cracked across the sky, Reese tightened his grip on the steering wheel.
37 years. 1 hair. And somehow the killer, or his ghost, was still out there. The rain hadn't stopped since he crossed into Bell County. The 2-lane highway stretched endlessly through soaked farmland, each milepost swallowed by mist. Reese drove with one hand on the wheel, the other thumbing through the printed case notes spread across the passenger seat. Every name, every date felt like a puzzle piece with the corners rubbed off. He pulled off near a rusted sign that read Hollow Creek, population 2041. The town looked half asleep, gas station lights flickering in the drizzle, a diner still open but empty. He parked outside the sheriff's office, a squat brick building with a single patrol car out front. Inside, the walls were lined with faded wanted posters and deer mounts. A woman in uniform sat behind the counter, tapping a pen against a mug that said World's Okayest Deputy. She looked up when he entered.
"You lost, Agent."
Reese flashed his badge. "Special Agent Daniel Reese, FBI. I'm here about the Hollow Creek disappearances." Her expression stiffened. "You're about 3 years too late. That case is dead." "Not anymore," he said, setting the old Maple Hollow file on the counter. "I think your killer's been working longer than anyone realized." Within minutes, Sheriff Elaine Porter appeared. Mid-50s, tall, gray-streaked hair tied back tight. Her handshake was firm, her eyes skeptical. "Agent Reese," she said. "We've had more agents come through here than tourists. You think you're going to find something they didn't?" "I think I already have," he said quietly. They sat in her cramped office, rain ticking against the window. Reese laid out both files, 1979 and 2012 to 2015. Porter studied the photographs, frowning at the similarities. "Same build, same weapon type, same jewelry pattern," she murmured. "But that's impossible. Whoever did this back then would be pushing 70 now." "Unless it wasn't just one person," Reese said. "What if it was passed down? A method, a ritual, something taught." She gave him a long look. "You're saying a family tradition of murder?" "I'm saying something survived." Porter leaned back. "You said there was a DNA hit." Reese nodded. "Mitochondrial match. Maternal line. That means whoever left that hair decades ago was related, mother, daughter, sister, to someone involved in your Hollow Creek cases." Porter rubbed her temples. "So you're telling me one of our missing girls might have been related to your original victim?" "That's one possibility," he said. "The other is that the killer's bloodline never stopped." They were silent for a moment. Outside, thunder rolled over the valley. Porter finally stood. "There's someone you should talk to. The last known relative of one of our victims. She runs the diner down the road." Reese followed her through the rain back to his car. The diner's neon sign buzzed weakly, Betty's Cafe. Inside, the smell of coffee and fried onions filled the air. A woman in her 40s looked up from behind the counter, wiping her hands on a towel. "Sheriff," she said, surprised. "Twice in 1 week?" "Agent Reese," Porter said, gesturing to him. "This is Laura Dean. Her sister Rachel was one of the women who vanished in 2014. Laura's eyes softened. "You found something?" "Maybe," Reese said. "Can I ask you a few questions?" She nodded and led him to a corner booth. Rain streaked the windows as she spoke. Rachel had been 27, quiet, worked part-time at the local library. One night she closed early, said she was meeting someone. She never came home. No one knew who it was, Laura said. But she'd been different those last few weeks. She wore this new bracelet, copper wire, real thin. Said someone made it for her. Reese's pulse quickened. Do you still have it? Laura shook her head. The sheriff took it for evidence. Said it didn't lead anywhere. Porter frowned. We sent that piece to the state lab. They said no prints, no residue. We got nothing.
Can I see it? Reese asked.
Back at the station, Porter unlocked the evidence cabinet and pulled out a small plastic bag. Inside was the bracelet, simple, handmade, and twisted into a spiral pattern that looked almost deliberate. Reese studied it carefully, then looked up. There's writing on the inside. They leaned closer. Tiny etched letters barely visible through oxidation.
It read, Property of J.T. Reese. The air went cold.
Porter looked at him sharply. That's your father's name, isn't it? Reese's throat tightened. Yes, it is. He turned the bracelet over again. His father had died in 2002, long before these disappearances. There was no logical way his name should be there, unless someone wanted it to be.
Could this be a coincidence? Porter asked softly.
He shook his head. My father's note said the first victim was wearing a bracelet just like this. The same pattern, the same metal. Porter crossed her arms. If this is true, then someone's been keeping your father's case alive, either to honor it
or to finish it, Reese said.
Lightning flashed outside, flooding the small office with white light. For a brief moment, Reese thought he saw movement in the reflection of the glass, a shape standing at the far end of the street, motionless, watching.
By the time he turned, it was gone.
He pocketed a copy of the bracelet photo and stepped back into the rain. The sheriff locked the door behind them. Agent Reese, Porter said, if there's something you're not telling me. He stopped her. There is. My father got letters after he retired. No return address, no name, just newspaper clippings about the case. He thought it was a prank.
And you think it wasn't? I think whoever sent them knew something he didn't.
The rain grew heavier, soaking through his jacket. Across the street, a payphone began to ring, sharp and hollow against the storm. No one moved to answer it. Reese turned to look at it, the phone swinging slightly in the wind, the receiver hanging loose.
Does that still work? He asked.
Porter frowned. That line's been dead for years.
The ringing stopped.
Reese stared at it a moment longer, a chill crawling up his spine. Then he got into his car, closed the door, and whispered under his breath, Dad, what did you leave behind? Sleep didn't come that night. Reese sat in his motel room, lights dimmed, the Maple Hollow and Hollow Creek files spread across the bed like a paper graveyard. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. Outside, rain tapped against the window in uneven rhythm. He read the same lines over and over, but his mind wasn't on the words. It was on that bracelet, his father's name carved into the metal like a signature from beyond the grave. He opened his laptop and accessed the Bureau's internal database. His credentials gave him clearance to the Archived Records Division, but not to suppress case files. The ones that didn't officially exist. His father had hinted about them once when Daniel was a rookie. Some files don't close, he'd said. They just get buried deeper. Reese typed his father's old badge number into the system, cross-referencing it with the Maple Hollow case ID. Nothing. Then he tried an override code, one he shouldn't have remembered, but did. The screen flickered. A hidden directory appeared, restricted files, Operation Evergreen. He clicked it. A list of names appeared. Most were blacked out, but one wasn't real Jonas T., his father's alias. Reese leaned closer. The last entry was dated 1983, 4 years after the Maple Hollow murder. The file tag read Behavioral Patterns Transference Project.
He opened it. The document was brief, half-redacted, but the first line sent a chill down his spine.
Subject demonstrates fixation on symbolic continuity. Belief evil can be inherited, encoded, and preserved. Reese scrolled further. Notes referenced a controlled study of serial offenders' families, patterns, behaviors, even artifacts, personal items that carried emotional or genetic significance. His father had been part of it.
Another note stood out. If replication occurs in offspring, recommend containment protocol.
He stared at the screen, realization dawning like cold sunlight. His father hadn't just investigated killers. He'd been studying them, testing a theory, one that the Bureau had tried to erase.
The knock on the door jolted him. He closed the laptop fast. Who is it? Sheriff Porter.
He opened the door. She stood there, raincoat dripping, face tense. You need to see this. They drove to the edge of town where the creek cut through the woods. Police lights flashed blue across the mud. Deputies were gathered near a shallow grave recently disturbed by the floodwater.
Porter handed him a flashlight.
We found it about an hour ago. A hiker called it in.
Reese crouched beside the pit.
Inside lay fragments of a human skeleton tangled in what looked like copper wire. He reached out, brushing away dirt until something small glinted beneath his glove, a silver locket. He turned it over. Inside was a faded photo of a young woman, the same woman from the Maple Hollow Polaroids.
Porter exhaled. How the hell did she end up here?
Reese didn't answer. His mind was racing. The timeline didn't make sense. Maple Hollow was hundreds of miles away. If this was the same victim, she'd been moved years later, which meant someone had gone to incredible lengths to keep her hidden, or to bring her back. The coroner arrived, lifting the remains carefully into evidence bags. As they left, Porter pulled Reese aside. You're holding back on me. What's going on? He hesitated.
My father was part of a project, a psychological study about inherited violence. It looks like this case might have been part of it.
She stared at him.
You're saying your father experimented on people?
No, Reese said quietly.
I think someone else did. And my father tried to stop them.
Back at the station, Reese reopened the hidden file. There was one attachment he hadn't seen before, an audio recording labeled Evergreen 47A. He pressed play.
A man's voice crackled through static, unmistakably his father's.
If anyone finds this, they'll say I lost control. They'll say I went too far. But you can't bury what's already alive. It passes down. It remembers.
Then a pause, a softer tone.
Daniel, if you're hearing this, I couldn't finish it. But it's yours now. End it before it finds you.
The recording ended.
Reese sat frozen, the sound echoing in his ears. The office clock ticked loudly. He realized he was gripping the edge of the desk hard enough that his knuckles had gone white.
Porter looked shaken. He was talking to you.
He nodded slowly. He knew this wasn't over. Suddenly, a fax machine in the corner whirred to life, paper spooling out slowly. Porter frowned. No one's used that thing in years.
Reese stepped forward. The message printed in uneven type. Stop digging or you'll join her.
Porter swore under her breath.
Who even has this number?
Reese turned the paper over. The back was damp, as if someone had touched it with wet fingers. The phone line connected to an outside number, traceable but outdated. He looked at the timestamp. Received 2:07 a.m. Origin, Maple Hollow, VA.
That was 3 states away.
Reese's voice was steady. Pack your things, Sheriff. We're going to Virginia. By dawn, they were on the road again. The storm followed them, heavy and relentless. Reese drove in silence, his thoughts looping through everything his father had said. Evil can be inherited. encoded, preserved. He remembered something else from his father's old notebooks, a phrase he never understood until now: the blood remembers. They reached Maple Hollow by afternoon. The town hadn't changed much since the photos: a scattering of houses, a rusted water tower, a main street that looked forgotten. The old police station was now an antique store. Porter scanned the quiet street. So where do we start? Reese nodded toward the woods, where it ended. They followed a dirt trail that wound into the trees, the same place his father's team had found the first body in 1979. The air was heavy, the silence thick. About half a mile in, the ground sloped into a ravine. At the bottom stood an old cabin, half-collapsed, ivy creeping up the walls. Porter hesitated. This place on record? Reese shook his head. No, but it's where the original map from my father's notes leads. He pushed open the door. The hinges groaned. Inside, dust motes swirled in the beam of his flashlight. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars, notes, and old tools. And at the center of the room, a table. On it lay rows of copper bracelets, each labeled with a year. Porter's voice dropped. He kept track of every victim. Reese reached the last one. 2015. Empty. He whispered. He was waiting for the next. A noise came from behind them. A soft creak, like a floorboard settling. They turned, flashlights sweeping the shadows. Nothing. Then a faint voice from outside carried through the wind. Daniel. Porter froze. Tell me that was the wind. Reese didn't answer. He stepped outside slowly, scanning the tree line. The forest was empty. But hanging from a branch, swaying gently in the breeze, was a copper bracelet, newly made, polished bright. Etched inside, in fresh letters, "You finally came home." Reese didn't move at first. The bracelet swayed, metal glinting in the faint light, raindrops sliding down its edge like tears. The woods were silent except for the rhythmic hum of distant thunder. He reached out and took the bracelet, fingers trembling slightly as he turned it over. There, beneath the inscription, was something he hadn't noticed before, a single blonde hair caught in the clasp. He stared at it for a long moment. The air felt heavier now, pressing against his chest. Porter approached slowly, her boots crunching against the wet earth. "You think this was left for you?" He nodded. "Someone knew I'd come back." By dawn, they were on the road again. The storm followed them, heavy and relentless. Reese drove in silence, his thoughts looping through everything his father had said. Evil can be inherited, encoded, preserved. He remembered something else from his father's old notebooks, a phrase he never understood until now: the blood remembers. They reached Maple Hollow by afternoon. The town hadn't changed much since the photos: a scattering of houses, a rusted water tower, a main street that looked forgotten. The old police station was now an antique store. Porter scanned the quiet street. "So where do we start?" Reese nodded toward the woods, where it ended. They followed a dirt trail that wound into the trees, the same place his father's team had found the first body in 1979. The air was heavy, the silence thick. About half a mile in, the ground sloped into a ravine. At the bottom stood an old cabin, half-collapsed, ivy creeping up the walls. Porter hesitated. "This place on record?" Reese shook his head. "No, but it's where the original map from my father's notes leads." He pushed open the door. The hinges groaned. Inside, dust motes swirled in the beam of his flashlight. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars, notes, and old tools. And at the center of the room, a table. On it lay rows of copper bracelets, each labeled with a year. Porter's voice dropped. He kept track of every victim. Reese reached the last one. 2015. Empty. He whispered. He was waiting for the next. A noise came from behind them, a soft creak, like a floorboard settling. They turned, flashlight sweeping the shadows.
Nothing. Then a faint voice from outside carried through the wind, "Daniel." Porter froze. "Tell me that was the wind."
Reese didn't answer. He stepped outside slowly, scanning the tree line. The forest was empty. But hanging from a branch, swaying gently in the breeze, was a copper bracelet, newly made, polished bright. Etched inside in fresh letters, "You finally came home." Reese didn't move at first. The bracelet swayed, metal glinting in the faint light, raindrops sliding down its edge like tears. The woods were silent except the rhythmic hum of distant thunder. He reached out and took the bracelet, fingers trembling slightly as he turned it over. There, beneath the inscription, was something he hadn't noticed before, a single blonde hair caught in the clasp. He stared at it for a long moment. The air felt heavier now, pressing against his chest. Porter approached slowly, her boots crunching against the wet earth. "You think this was left for you?" He nodded. "Someone knew I'd come back." By dawn, they were on the road again. The storm followed them, heavy and relentless. Reese drove in silence, his thoughts looping through everything his father had said. Evil can be inherited, encoded, preserved. He remembered something else from his father's old notebooks, a phrase he never understood until now: "The blood remembers." They reached Maple Hollow by afternoon. The town hadn't changed much since the photos. A scattering of houses, a rusted water tower, a main street that looked forgotten. The old police station was now an antique store. Porter scanned the quiet street. "So where do we start?" Reese nodded toward the woods, where it ended. They followed a dirt trail that wound into the trees, the same place his father's team had found the first body in 1979. The air was heavy, the silence thick. About half a mile in, the ground sloped into a ravine. At the bottom stood an old cabin, half-collapsed ivy creeping up the walls. Porter hesitated. "This place on record?" Reese shook his head. "No, but it's where the original map from my father's notes leads." He pushed open the door. The hinges groaned. Inside, dust motes swirled in the beam of his flashlight. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars, notes, and old tools. And at the center of the room, a table. On it lay rows of copper bracelets, each labeled with a year. Porter's voice dropped. He kept track of every victim. Reese reached the last one. 2015. Empty. He whispered. He was waiting for the next. A noise came from behind them, a soft creak, like a floorboard settling. They turned, flashlights sweeping the shadows. "Nothing." Then a faint voice from outside carried through the wind, "Daniel." Porter froze. "Tell me that was the wind." Reese didn't answer. He stepped outside slowly, scanning the tree line. The forest was empty. But hanging from a branch, swaying gently in the breeze, was a copper bracelet, newly made, polished bright. Etched inside, in fresh letters, "You finally came home." Reese didn't move at first. The bracelet swayed, metal glinting in the faint light, raindrops sliding down its edge like tears. The woods were silent except for the rhythmic hum of distant thunder. He reached down and took the bracelet, fingers trembling slightly as he turned it over. There, beneath the inscription, was something he hadn't noticed before, a single blonde hair caught in the clasp. He stared at it for a long moment. The air felt heavier now, pressing against his chest. Porter approached slowly, her boots crunching against the wet earth. "You think this was left for you?" He nodded. "Someone knew I'd come back." They sealed the bracelet in an evidence bag. Reese placed it carefully in his pocket and turned toward the cabin again. Something about that place felt unfinished, like a sentence waiting for its final word. They went back inside. Rain began to pour harder, thunder rolling closer. Porter scanned the shelves again while Reese examined the desk. It was old, scarred with deep grooves, but one of the drawers was locked. He pried it open with his pocket knife and found a notebook inside. The cover was cracked, The pages yellowed, but the handwriting was unmistakable. His father's. He flipped through it quickly. The entries grew more frantic as the years passed.
They told me it was science. It was never science. We made something that remembers. And then on the last page, a line written in heavy ink. Find her before she finds you.
Reese's stomach turned. Her? Not him? The victims were women. Whoever this was, the pattern had changed. Porter read over his shoulder. You think your father was tracking someone specific? Before he could answer, his flashlight flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Porter's beam wavered, the light catching movement near the far wall.
Someone was there.
FBI, Reese barked, drawing his weapon. Step into the light. Silence. Then, from the corner, a figure stepped forward. A woman, tall, her face half hidden by the shadows. Her eyes glowed faintly from the beam's reflection, calm and unblinking. You shouldn't have come back, she said softly. Her voice was calm, familiar in a way that made Reese's skin crawl.
Who are you? Porter demanded.
The woman tilted her head, studying Reese. He used to ask the same thing, you know. Your father. He never understood what he created.
Reese's heart pounded. What are you talking about?
The woman smiled faintly. He thought evil was inherited, that it ran in bloodlines, but it doesn't. It attaches to memory. It finds the ones who remember. She stepped closer, and for a split second the light revealed her face, pale, angular, with sharp green eyes that mirrored the old photographs from the Maple Hollow file.
The same face. The same woman.
Porter gasped. That's impossible. You're supposed to be dead. The woman's smile widened slightly. He buried me, but he didn't understand what he buried. She moved fast, faster than either expected. The lamp on the shelf toppled, glass shattering, flames licking up the wood as smoke filled the cabin. Reese fired, the shot echoing through the night, but the woman vanished into the shadows. Out! Porter shouted, coughing as the flames spread. They stumbled outside, rain hissing as it met fire. The cabin burned bright against the dark trees. Reese scanned the clearing, gun raised, but the woman was gone. Only the echo of her words lingered in his mind. It finds the ones who remember. By morning, the cabin was nothing but charred wood and ash. Fire crews combed through what was left, but no body was found. Porter handed Reese a mug of coffee as he sat on the hood of their car, staring at the rising smoke. You think she's still alive? Reese didn't answer right away. He pulled out the evidence bag with the bracelet. The blonde hair glinted faintly in the sun. That wasn't her hair, he said quietly. Too fine, too short.
Porter frowned. Then whose?
Reese's phone buzzed. A blocked number. He answered cautiously, Reese. Silence. Then a whisper, faint and crackling through static. You can't burn memory.
The call ended.